Hey guys, Taki here. One of my favorite parts about doing this hobby is that I get to look at new tech, and today we get to do that, but we need to build it first. As you can guess from the package contents, we're going to be building a Game Boy Color, but not a normal Game Boy Color. This GBC is powered by an FPGA. I don't know if this will come as a kit like this, or if it'll be pre-assembled, but I will say that it's not difficult to build a GBC from this point, especially with some of the modifications that they've made. In my box, I have a new shell, membrane buttons, some hardware, a set of black buttons, the motherboard, a laminated IPS screen, a charging cable, a battery, and a speaker. As I mentioned, they did make some important improvements in this new PCB that simplifies the entire building process significantly. Notable things are the battery connector and the Type-C connector. They also have a spot for an LED mod, but I won't be doing that. The power switch is not the same as a stock board, as is most of this top half. They've etched off the label on this Go-In FPGA, but that information is already known from other videos. The volume wheel is also a bit different. This one rocks back and forth, and it can also click in. We don't have an IR sensor on this board, which is not ideal for compatibility, but we do have a link cable port, and I'm planning to check if that works. The IPS screen seems to be the same as the retro pixel screen that they sell for the GBC. The biggest difference here is the connector doesn't require us to solder anything at all. We're going to start this build by putting in the new membrane buttons and the speaker. Make sure that the speaker is in like this or the PCB won't fit. Then you can take the PCB and it should fit into place over the screw holes. At this point, you can lift up the PCB to test the buttons on the other side just to make sure that everything is installed correctly. While you have this in your hand, start putting in the 3 PCB screws and connect the speaker. I'm going to flip the unit over now to make sure everything feels like it should. This is using aftermarket conductive rubber pads, and these won't feel as good as official ones, especially not official ones that have been broken in. If you have the ability to use real rubber pads, that is the best option, but these aren't bad. Everything feels good, so let's move to the next step. We need to put in the power switch and the IR shield. My unit came with 2, so I'm going to go with the one that looks better. Then we can grab our back shell and screw in the 6 remaining screws. With that done, we can work on the screen. Start by connecting the ribbon cable to the motherboard and then connect the screen to the ribbon cable. At this point, you would remove the adhesive strip cover, but I won't be doing that because I want to be able to get back in here easily. This screen is elevated from the shell, so it probably doesn't need to have insulation on the back of the screen, but it's probably a good idea to put some Kapton tape on the back of this to avoid any potential shorts. Finish up the screen installation by sliding it into the pocket, and then it should push into place with some work on the top right corner. The only thing left for us to do is to connect the battery. They have a connector that is visible with the shell installed. You'll also notice that we have connectors for AA batteries, but we only have them on one side of the shell, and I wasn't given any other parts for the other side. I don't know if this is meant to be compatible with AA batteries, but it seems like it would based on the connector that they've added to the other side. I'm going to go with the 1800 milliamp hour cell that was included in my box. Installing this is super easy to do with the cutaway that they've added in the battery compartment. Then we can just close the thing up. My kit did not come with stickers for the back of this, but I did buy some from another store. They're shipping that from the other side of the country, so I might not get them before this video is done. That seems to be the only thing lacking from this kit. Now that we finally have the thing built, let's start going over the features that it has, and we can interact with some of those features without even booting into a game. I'm going to flip the switch on the side of the unit, and then it will boot the device up into this Game Boy screen, and you can see that it did start with the Game Boy Color boot screen. On the left side of this console, you have that volume rocker, but if you press it in, you can activate the FPGA menu. In this menu, you can control the brightness. I have this set at max right now. If I press the B button, you'll see that it does get very dim at the lowest level, and the maximum level is also very bright. You can also control the volume in here, but you can do that outside of the menu with that volume rocker. Under the display setting, you can see that it's set to full. If I press B on this, it will go to 4xP, which is the pixel mode, but I can also use 4x, and these are both integer scaling. If you have another kit that uses this screen, then that's going to be what you will see. This is going to give you the cleanest image possible without any stretching or any distortion. This is a good option to have for people that want to get a very sharp picture, but I think with the way that this frame is set up, the full version looks the best in most situations. You You'll also notice that we have a core option. This is going to allow you to select whether or not you're using the Game Boy Color FPGA core or the Game Boy FPGA core. So for example, if I set this to Game Boy and then I go down to save, now when I turn the device on with a Game Boy cartridge, it will behave as a normal Game Boy. So you can see in this, I don't have any color, but we can add color to this with the palette option. Let's go back into that menu again. And now I'm going to go down to the palette option and we can cycle through a ton of colors on here. And these are the same ones that you would see on any other kit that uses this screen. The only difference is it's easier to see which palette you are actually using at any given time. So yeah, these are the palettes that you have available. And these are the ones that I use on my Game Boy Pocket that's modded with this screen. I really like them. They look really good if you're going to be playing on a modded Game Boy. If we go back to that core option now and we turn it to GBC and then we save and reset, the unit will power back up and act as a Game Boy Color, which means this game will be in color. And there you go. You can see that everything is in color. There are only a couple other things inside this menu. If we go down to the frame mix option, this is going to be something that you're going to want to keep on all the time, but I will show you what this does by using another game. So here we are in Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, and you can see that this chain here has a transparency effect applied to it. On a real Game Boy, it would also look like this, but the way that it achieves that effect doesn't translate very well to modern displays like this. If I go back into the options again and I turn this off, you'll see that that chain is now flickering to achieve that transparency effect because that's what it would do on a real Game Boy. So for compatibility reasons, we can just leave this on and then we won't have to deal with that issue because the transparency effects will look like how they are supposed to. This doesn't work in every single case possible, but it does work in the majority of them. We only have two other options on this. The first is something called GBC display. And if you have this set to the GBC core, then this is going to change how the colors are represented on your screen. And occasionally you will have to set this to GB or GBC for compatibility reasons. For example, if I set this to GBC, you'll see that this really affects the sprites that are on screen. So we just got to go back into that menu, set this to GB, and then everything looks better. The unfortunate thing about this current implementation is that these settings aren't saved on a per game basis. If they were, that would be amazing, but they aren't. Our final setting is a clock speed setting, and I don't know that this thing runs cycle accurate even when it's all the way over to the right like this. I'm going to have to test that a bit further to see if it does match up to a real Game Boy, but essentially what this is going to do is it's going to slow down the FPGA core, and that will be most notable in the audio. So I'm going to show you what this is like with the intro sequence from Pokemon Red with the clock speed on the minimum level and the clock speed all the way over to the right. Here's how it sounds with the clock speed all the way over to the left. And here's how it sounds with the clock speed maxed out. And here's a normal GBC. I also want to do a comparison against a real Game Boy Color in this video, and this one on the right is the one that I've modded myself. I have the Q5 IPS panel that this company sells, and I also have their aftermarket shell. Both of these are now playing the same game, booted off of a flash card, and we can start to see some of the differences between them. The first thing that I'm noticing is that the aftermarket screen on my Game Boy Color is a bit brighter than the one on the left. The color temperature is also slightly different, but what I want to do right now is put this into the 4X mode so that way it's an even comparison between the two of them. And this is how things look when we have that option enabled. Again, this isn't the best frame for this display. I think it would have been cool if we could have gotten the one that we have for the aftermarket shells, but it does work well. Now, both of these things look awesome, but the one on the right looks a bit better to me. If I didn't own it, then I would think that this thing is absolutely amazing, and it is amazing. The screen looks perfect on this. Now, even though the screen on the right is a bit brighter, I think the colors look a bit better on the screen that is used in this FPGA Game Boy Color. If we look at that carpet right here, that is a deeper tone than it is on the right unit. And when we go outside, we can also see a bit more saturation in the grass and in the roof of this house. If I try to match the brightness between the two of them, I still see that this one has a bit more saturation than the screen on the right. So I don't know if this is using exactly the same panel, but both of them look great, especially compared to a normal Game Boy Color. If you compare the modded screen to a real Game Boy Color, the added screen real estate that you're getting is a huge quality of life improvement, but this jump in screen size makes this able to compete against more modern handhelds. I like my Game Boy Color and I use it almost daily, but this is definitely a good looking device. Now, the company that makes this hasn't given any information on the FPGA that they've used or what kind of things that they were trying to aim for. I don't know if this is going to be as accurate as the Game Boy or Game Boy Color FPGA cores you can get from Mister, but it should be good enough for average users. That being said, compatibility is going to be a lot better on Game Boy Color, especially if you're using aftermarket cards. There's one thing that we can do to see how far this device is from a real one, and we can do that by just running a clock application. I started these at the same time, and I want to see how far they get desynced after 10 minutes. If the gap is very big, I'll go down to the next highest clock setting and test again. After doing the full test, we are 6 seconds faster on the FPGA GBC over a 10-minute span. I did the same test again, but I swapped the carts this time and we got the same gap. Now I'll test the next highest clock speed setting to see if that gets us closer to the GBC. With that setting, we are running slower than a stock GBC by around 7 seconds. And as a baseline, a normal Game Boy should be perfectly in sync no matter how long you run this test. I want to do a separate section just on flashcard capabilities because I think that is an important topic for this new device. There are two really cheap flashcards on the market. One of them is the Easy Flash Junior and the other is this EverDrive clone. With this new FPGA handheld, you're going to want to forget about the Easy Flash Junior and just focus on this or a real EverDrive card. The Easy Flash Junior can work, but the compatibility is way more miss than hit. I'll try to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start by booting this up, and I'm going to go into my Game Boy directory, and I'm just going to pick a random game from this list that I haven't tested before, and let's just see if it can work. Now, as you can see, that game didn't boot, and I'm also not able to access the FPGA menu, but there's one workaround that might work. Let's restart the device again. Let's open up the OSD menu again, and this time let's set the core to Game Boy. Then I'm going to save, and I'm going to reset. Now I'm going to try to load that exact same game again. And again, I didn't test this before I filmed this section, so I don't even know if this is going to work right now, but this is the same thing that I had to do for another game. Okay, we can see the boot screen again. And we are able to play this game, but we're only able to play it with the Game Boy core. We can't play this with the GBC core. If I change it right now and I reset, it won't load. So that's unfortunate. It's not the end of the world because we can still play the game, but it's a lot more work to have to mess around with those settings for this flash card. I use my Game Boy Pocket a lot, so being limited to this color palette doesn't really affect me at all. And if we go into that menu again, I always have all of these other palette options to choose from. I'm going to go back into that Game Boy menu now and see if I can manage to load any of them with the Game Boy Color core. All right, I have 20 Game Boy games on here, and 8 of them would load with the Game Boy Color core. Final Fantasy Legends 1 and 3, Metroid 2, Super Mario Land 1 and 2, Tetris 1 and 2, and Wario Land 2. All of these can load with the Game Boy core, but those are the only ones from this collection that could run with the Game Boy Color core. When it comes to Game Boy Color games with the Game Boy Color core, compatibility is really bad with this card, so I think it's worth just forgetting that it can even boot Game Boy Color games entirely if you own it and this device. The situation is a lot different if you own this EverDrive clone card. So far, this hasn't given me a lot of trouble booting Game Boy games with the Game Boy Color core, but it does have graphical issues in some things like you can see here. This is Donkey Kong Land, and I had to change one option to be able to get it to even look like this. If we go to the GBC display, you can see it's on GB. If I put it on GBC, everything is inverted. And this is something that you'll see in other instances with other games. They don't always look broken like this. Sometimes it's just as simple as inverting the colors like it was with the Link's Awakening game that I already showed. The important distinction to make between this card and the other one is that the games at least boot up even if they are broken. Sometimes it is just a matter of coming down to this option and toggling it to GB mode to fix the colors. When it comes to Game Boy Color compatibility with this card, the situation is much better. All of the games that I've tried with this cartridge work. So just as a recap, the Easy Flash Junior can play GB games and some GBC games, namely the Pokemon ones. and the EverDrive clone can play GB and GBC games. This one has the best compatibility out of the cheap cards. If you want something better than this, then you should go with a real EverDrive cartridge or official games. Beyond flash cards, you also have the ability to use bootleg cartridges, and these are going to be things like these Pokemon cartridges that are very cheap. Usually these are about $3 or $4, and sometimes they'll have batteries, but sometimes they won't. All of these are going to work with this FPGA, no problem. I also went ahead and bought these cartridges right here. I'm planning to do something with them in the next section of this video. The differences between these two groups of cartridges is these three right here have a battery in them, which makes them more useful for something that I want to do. But yeah, versus just like using a real official game, these are your next best option if you want to conserve battery power, because those other cheaper flash cards that we were just looking at can use a lot of power, and this already uses an FPGA, which should use more power. Using these is going to work the same as a normal game. The only difference with these Pokemon ones is some of them are modded so that way they don't need a battery to be able to save their file, and that's the situation with this Pokemon Red version. I will point out that if you found a graphical issue when you were playing a game on the flash card, you'll see the same thing when you play it on one of these cartridges or on an official cartridge. So in this example here, I need to go back into that menu again and then go down to GBC display and then change that to GB, save, and then close the menu and I'm all set. Just be aware that you will have to toggle that option back in games that don't have compatibility issues. Now it's time to do an interesting test. I bought a couple of these bootleg cartridges for the sole purpose of seeing if I could reflash the ROMs that were included in them. If we take this cartridge and boot it up in the FPGA Game Boy Color, you will see that this ROM is in Chinese. I want to see how difficult it is to flash this to the English ROM. In my quest to find a cheap solution to do this, I came across this GB Flash board that's based off of some open source work. I bought this thing for $17 and I want to see if it can do the job. If we open up this cartridge, we can see that it has a battery, but the thing that's the most important is this board model number right here on the bottom. Based on the first couple of digits that are here, this cartridge should be able to be reprogrammed with a different ROM. Let's go try that out right now. This entire process is pretty easy. With this thing connected to your computer, all you have to do is load up the flashing software and then analyze the card that you have. If it is a recognized card, then you're pretty much good to go. Just select the ROM that you want to flash to it and then do the flashing process. I just finished that process, so let's go ahead and see if this ROM has now switched over to the English one. And you can see that it worked. After doing that, I also went ahead and flashed this with a very cool version of Pokemon. This is Pokemon Crystal Clear, and it works very well on this card. The final thing that we need to look at is link cable support. Right now we have bootleg carts running on both of these, and we'll just try to use the cable club. I'm going to do a quick battle just to show that this works. And as you can see, it works. I'll do another GB game, but this time both handhelds are using flash carts. This also works. Again with flash carts, we have Pokemon Crystal on both units, and we can battle. This isn't without graphical bugs though. When I had the cable connected running Pokemon Gold and Silver, I had some sprite issues during an evolution and when I started the cable battle. This went away when the cable was removed. So as we saw, there are still some things that they need to iron out with this device, and that probably leads you to wonder, how do you go about updating this when they have newer code available? And that is surprisingly a very easy process. All you need to do is turn the unit on without a game inserted, and then you'll be sitting at this Game Boy screen, and then you need to connect a USB cable from your computer to the PCB, and then it will show up as a flash drive on your computer. Then all you need to do is copy that update file to that new drive that you have, and the device will update. I had the opportunity to try a few versions out while I was filming this video, and one of the older versions that was older than the one that I started this video out with actually had better compatibility with some of the things I was having problems with in the first sections of this video. It still has the same version number, but it can do more things than the latest version that I had when I started this video. But yeah, the easy update process leaves me hopeful that they will be able to iron out more of the bugs that this thing has, and then that process to update the devices that people buy will be very seamless. Let's wrap up this video with my thoughts on the Game Boy Color FPGA and some other bits that I didn't get to cover in the main video. First off, I think this thing is awesome. I like how easy it was to build, how simple it is to apply updates, and I think this is a step in the right direction for more FPGA-based handhelds. We didn't talk about price before this point in the video, and that's because I didn't have any pricing information until I started filming this section. I've been told that all of the components that I used to make this will cost $69 as a kit, and that is way cheaper than I expected. That's a great deal for the hardware that this uses, even beyond the whole FPGA thing. If I wanted to get another Game Boy Color from the secondhand market where I live and all of the parts that I would need to mod it, I would spend a lot more than $69. And while the modding process isn't like super challenging for the GBC, this didn't require any soldering at all. It is super novice friendly. That being said, they need to keep pushing out software updates to improve compatibility. If compatibility was better than it is right now, I think this hardware could command a higher price tag than $69. So that's the price. We also never touched on battery life, and that's because I was still working on it up to this point. I did 2 full battery drains for this video, but I still have another one that I want to do. That one will end up in the pinned comment of this video after it's uploaded. The first test that I did was with the Easy Flash Junior running Wario Land 1 with the brightness on max. I got 5.5 hours of battery life before the device shut off. I then did the same thing with a bootleg cartridge of Wario Land 1 with the brightness on max, and I got 6 hours and 10 minutes of battery life before the device shut off. That is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I still have to do the same test with the other flash card that I showed in this video, but I don't expect that it will beat 6 hours. Charging speed is a bit on the slow side with this hardware. This thing charges at a max of 2 watts, which isn't the end of the world, but it's a lot slower than I would like. This is going to be a handheld that you'll want to leave charging at night. But that's all I've got for this one. Hopefully next year we'll bring a lot more affordable FPGA handheld options because this market desperately needs a shakeup. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at the video that I did on the Nintendo DS in 2023. Happy gaming everyone. Taki out.